Hello beautiful people, my name is Vendi and welcome to another Writer Wednesday. If you've been following my Writer Wednesday journey, then you know that just about now, by the time you're watching this video, I am well into my fast drafting process. I can't tell you how it's going because today, the day I'm filming, is technically day one, and to procrastinate starting my fast draft, I have decided to give you guys my top 5 outlining tips. Outlining is my greatest tool as a writer. It helps me plan out what I'm gonna do before I have to do it and kind of gives me a blueprint to work from so that I know what my story is approximately going to look like by the time it's finished. But if you're not a natural born plotter, if you're a pantser who maybe wants to start adding a little bit of structure into their writing life, or you just want to start writing and you think you'd be an outliner but you don't know where to begin, it can get a little overwhelming because all of the resources online give you like specific types of outlining and you might not know which one is going to fit your personal style the best. I'm personally of the belief that while you can group certain types of outlining together into like vague categories, for every writer there is a separate outlining style. And to help you find your own and craft your own, I have 5 sort of general tips that I think work for every type of outliner, no matter how detail-oriented or loosey-goosey you are. So without further ado, here are my outlining tips. Tip number 1. Know your beginning and know your ending. Writing a novel is like running a marathon, except about 1,000,000 times more emotionally draining and hopefully about 1,000,000 times less sweaty. Now I think of plotters as pretty exercise-averse people. We're the sort of people that wouldn't run a race unless we knew exactly when we got to stop, and of course you can't even start running a race if you don't know where to begin. For me, writing basically works the same way. I can't begin writing unless I know the finish line and unless I know the starting point. The beginning is a little bit more crucial here because that is where you begin. For this, you should have a pretty well-established main character, and you should have a pretty solid idea of the world and the setting that the character moves around in, and at least a vague outline of what the inciting incident is going to be, the thing that's going to take your main character out of the world that they currently exist in and push them into the world of the plot. Now, the ending can be a little bit less concrete than this because obviously you are not beginning at the ending, but at the very least, you should have some idea of how the main character's story arc is going to close, so the emotional and physical and mental states that they're going to be in at the end and how they differ from the way the main character is at the beginning. And you should know the consequences of the plot that are going to move the entire story. The consequences, of course, are very dependent on the genre of your story. In a fantasy or a sci-fi novel, this is usually the scene right after the big climactic battle. In a romance book, it's when the main pairing finally gets together and lives happily ever after. And in a mystery, it's where the mystery is finally solved. The conclusion, of course, will look different if you're only writing the first book in a series versus if you're writing a standalone novel, but the idea is that you know how this one story arc, the sort of story that's getting propelled by your one plot, is going to conclude. Tip number 2 is don't be afraid to work backwards. Even if you are a super linear writer, meaning you're gonna write your scenes in the order they appear in the final work, it doesn't mean that you have to outline in the same way. If you're anything like I was as a kid, you know those little mazes that you get on those paper mats in restaurants to keep you distracted before your food comes? You know the ones I'm talking about. Well, I always found it way easier to work them from the end of the maze to the beginning. I just found it a lot easier to see how things should go from back to front rather than from front to back. That's because when you work front to back, all you can see are possibilities, but when you work back to front, you already have the sort of result, and you can work back up the little domino effect of plot points that culminated in your conclusion. So to use an example that you might be familiar with, in the Fellowship of the Ring, Frodo and Sam split off from the rest of the Fellowship because Boromir attacked Frodo, because the One Ring corrupted him, and so on and so forth until you get all the way back to the beginning stage that you planned out earlier. Personally, I work back to front to establish plot points, but I sort of work front to back to establish character arcs. Of course, your plot can't exist without your characters, but it kind of makes sense when you get to the middle and your character is on their way to being established, and then your plot meets that point and it's like, oh, this is why character X would do that. And then you can sort of modify your character arc and your plot points to match up what you've kind of come to the conclusion is going to be the thing to do when the two storylines meet. Tip number 3 is start big, finish small. Just about every outlining method that I've ever been able to find on the internet, from the snowflake method to Caddy-tastic's 3-act, 9-block, 27-scene method to the skeleton outline, all of them encourage you to begin with big picture stuff and then work down to smaller detail level things. So if you're following my tips, you know 2 of your big, like, heavy hitter things already. You know your beginning and you know your ending. In addition to this, I recommend that you sort of develop your inciting incident a little more, the thing that's going to spark the plot. On the opposite side of that, you have your climax, which is sort of when everything kind of culminates. You should know your midpoint, otherwise known as the point of no return, and you should know your 1/3 of the story and 2/3 of the story dividers. The 1/3 of the story divider is your main character's highest point. This is when they feel kind of invincible after they've entered this new world and have to sort of push forward. And the 2/3 mark tends to be their darkest hour, where everything feels kind of like it's going to shit and your main character doesn't know what they're gonna do, and then they find some inner strength and yada yada yada. Once you've got your big picture heavy hitter points down, then you can find out all the little stuff that happens in between. I will caution you that at this part, it's very, very easy to start getting too detailed. So tip number 3.5 is don't overplan your scenes. Once you get to the point where you're basically writing like sentence level details, you aren't really outlining anymore. You're sort of in a pre-writing limbo, which is this protective, easy to hide shelter that writers go to when they're scared of just diving into their project and writing. But none of us want to be, outliners for a living. We want to be writers. We want to share our stories with the world. And the only way that you can do that is to take the plunge and finally just start writing. Tip number 4 is one that I've stolen from one of my all-time favorite authors, Susan Dennard, and it is to find your magical cookies. Susan explains this much better on her writing advice section of her website, so I'll have that linked in the description box below. But the basic premise of it is that every scene that you write shouldn't be a oh nothing happens scene, boring scene that sort of gets you from point A to point B. Every single one should feel like you're eating a magical story cookie. They should all be scenes that you're just dying to write, that you can't wait to get into for whatever reason. Whether it's because it's the point of view of your favorite character to write from, or because it's this super cool action scene that you've been wanting to write for forever, or because there's just a whole bunch of romantic tension like will they, won't they between your favorite pairing. Every scene should have at least one element that makes you want to write it, because the scenes that you want to write are exactly the sort of scenes that readers want to read. If you don't love what you're writing, readers are going to be able to tell, and you're not going to be passionate enough to push through the scene and then eventually push through your story. If while outlining you find yourself writing a whole lot of nothing scenes, ask yourself why, and ask yourself if you can put something into those scenes that's going to make them a magic cookie scene that's going to make you excited about it. Because if not, cut the scene. It's not necessary. It doesn't have to be there, I promise. Also, and this isn't Susan's brain anymore, it's mine, and that's when things get a little weird. Cookies are a blend of ingredients, if you will. Some magic baking chemistry happens to get a cookie, right? And that's what makes them so much more fun to eat than the various components that they're made of. Like, I'd rather eat a cookie than a cup of flour or a stick of butter or a raw egg. Those ingredients are kind of icky by themselves, but when you put them together, magic happens. In the same way, I'm of the belief that every scene should be a blend of various story components. So it's great if your scene pushes the plot forward. It's great if your scene explains why a character is the way they are. And it's great if a scene explains some cool new aspect of your world. But the scene is going to be so much stronger if you can combine at least 2 of those elements, and there's a bunch more elements, but those are like the main 3 ones, into one cohesive thing that the reader can enjoy as a magical cookie when they finally get to it. Additionally, making every scene a sort of combo deal thing makes it so that you can weave in magical cookie elements a lot easier. If it's just a pushing the plot forward scene, but you're not really excited about this section of the plot, then it's not a magical scene. It's not going to be something that's fun to write, and it's not going to be something that's fun to read. But if it pushes the plot forward and your main pairing is getting a little bit of like hate to love moments between them, all of a sudden it's way more fun to read and you're going to be way more excited to write it. And tip number 5, the one that I think is the most important out of all of these, is outline in pencil, not in ink. I don't mean this literally, of course. Use whatever medium you want. You can type it, you can write it in, I don't know, magic marker, whatever you want. What this tip means is don't be married to your outline. Don't think of it as something that's set in stone. Sometimes an outline looks incredible on paper, and then you start writing it and you realize this character would never act in XYZ way, so this thing can't happen. If while you're writing your story, something doesn't feel right, not about the writing, but about the sort of plan you have for the story, rewrite the outline. 9 times out of 10, the problem is in there, not with what you've written. Unlike baking magic cookies, writing is not an exact science. It's all about discovery and fun, and sometimes it's wildly frustrating, but it's so rewarding when you get it right. But it should never ever feel like a chore or like something you dread. And if you begin to follow your outline despite the story telling you that's not what needs to happen, it's gonna start feeling like a chore and a horrible thing that you dread. Fixing yourself to a path that isn't working is is the best way to teach yourself to fall out of love with writing. The conditioning of sitting down with dread to your keyboard and pittering out a word or two that just makes you angry is going to teach you that this thing that you're doing, this potentially rewarding, fun thing, is not rewarding or fun. And then you're gonna stop. So I'm here to beg and urge you guys not to stop and to listen to your gut and to trust your writing when it tells you the plan isn't working. And it might seem like a lot of hard work to re-outline, and as somebody who's been doing it for 2 weeks, yeah, it's pretty tough, but I promise you, your story will be so much better off for it. And that is it for my top 5 outlining tips. If you like this video, please leave it a thumbs up. It lets me know that you guys enjoy these sort of tips and tricks for writing. And if you like me, maybe consider subscribing to this channel. I promise more of this sort of content will be by next Wednesday for another Writer Wednesday. Comment down below and let me know if you have any outlining tips that I didn't mention. I would love to chat with you about this craft for as long as humanly possible. But as it is, I've set myself a writing deadline, which means I gotta wrap this up and start doing my fast draft. I'm super nervous, but super excited, and I trusted my outline, so, fingers crossed for me, guys. But anyway, that is it for me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you guys in my next video very, very soon. Goodbye.